Hey guys, my video has an orange hue to it, and you know what that means? It's Halloween season. And with it being Halloween season, means it's another day for me to not talk about Yakuza 0. A little while ago, I posted a poll on my community tab asking what video you guys would have wanted to see. A Luigi's Mansion video for Halloween or a Yakuza 0 video, and you guys chose Luigi's Mansion. That's right, fuck you, Alan. And to the three of you who actually did want me to make a video on Yakuza 0, I still am, but the poll was for me to decide which one I did first. With that out of the way, however, Luigi's Mansion. I fucking adore Luigi's Mansion. Hell, I'd even go a step further and say that the Luigi's Mansion series is probably the best Mario spin-off series. Yeah, I said it. Mario Kart and Mario Party may be fun, or at least it used to be, but I feel like Luigi's Mansion is so goddamn charming with how innovative it is to the Mario franchise as a whole. It's not like anything the general public has ever seen at the time. Pre-2001 Mario games have mainly just been about running and jumping. The appeal of Mario games is that because its fundamental design philosophy is so simple, it's open to a lot of experimentation while still feeling familiar, which is why games like Mario 3, World, and 64 are also vastly different from each other but still feel like Mario, because they still follow the core design philosophy of the series. Luigi's Mansion, on the other hand, says fuck that and is practically the complete opposite of what the Mario series was at the time. Whereas Mario games would usually take place in mostly brightly colored pastel environments where your movements are somewhat fast-paced and you jump a lot being a platformer, Luigi's Mansion has you fixed in a really dimly lit location, a singular location at that, where movements are a lot slower paced than every Mario game that came before it, and you can't jump at all. If you really think about it, Luigi's Mansion shouldn't have worked. It shouldn't have been successful, and yet it did. And I'm so fucking happy it did, because this is one of my favorite childhood games. I would have so much fun playing this game when I was a kid with my dad and my sister. I came for the fun designs of the ghost, but I stayed for how fun the game was. And playing it all those years later, I still love it. Sure, the gameplay loop is repetitive, and said gameplay was refined in Luigi's Mansion 3, but the original Luigi's Mansion is a game I will forever hold near and dear to my heart. And while on the topic of Luigi's Mansion 3, this game also fucking slaps. The gameplay was tweaked to perfection with the devs adding combat elements to the poltergust. Sure, it's nothing super in depth, but it's so goddamn fun and satisfying to hold down on your strobe but waiting to stun a ghost only for you to slam the shit out of them into a table. And yeah, while I do have gripes with the game, such as the hotel thing being dropped pretty early over different themed floors being a really sharp contrast with the first game, or with it being a bit too long for my liking, but it's still an incredible game. Both Luigi's Mansion 1 and 3 are phenomenal gaming experiences that everyone should play at least once. Oh yeah, I forgot about Dark Moon. In terms of good Luigi's Mansion games, no one has ever really brought up Dark Moon in the same way as they did with 1 or 3, and I never understood why. I always hear people say that it's not as good as the original because its atmosphere is more cartoony than the original, which wasn't really scary per se, but it had a much darker tone and eerier vibe to it compared to other Mario games. But thinking about it now, I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually talk about the gameplay, more so how lacking the aesthetic was compared to the original, and honestly, that's kinda fucking shallow and stupid. Now, that's not to say I like it, because I've never played it. Now, you watching this is probably like, what the fuck, man? You were just saying that you love the original Luigi's Mansion and the third one, and now you're saying that you never played the sequel that was quite literally 12 years in the making? Okay, let me explain. Growing up, I never had a 3DS, because I was scared that if I asked my parents for one, they would be like, but you already have a DS. And yet, despite that, I had a Wii U. It's even more confusing to the average consumer than the DS line and the 3DS line.
Yeah, look like I've been upgraded.
But hey, what matters now was that I have both a 3DS and a copy of Dark Moon for my gaming pleasure. So, without further ado, let's finally start talking about Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. So like I said earlier, fans' main gripe with Dark Moon is its more cartoony art style, and yes, while it can be a little jarring and underwhelming at first comparing it to the original, it more than makes up for it in its use of the 3D effect. Yeah, the 3D effect. That thing that everyone used for 5 seconds the moment they got the system, and then had it off for the remainder of the time they had their 3DSs. That thing that only like 2 games took advantage of, because I'm pretty sure every developer, including Nintendo themselves, forgot it even existed. Yeah, that 3D effect. Dark Moon benefits from the 3D effect in really cool and creative ways. So many things have much greater depth and detail to them because of the 3D slider being on, from the shining of your flashlight having a beautiful glare to it, the gusts of swirling wind from the poltergeist looking 3-dimensional and maybe even larger in scale than it was without the 3D effect, the attacks of the ghosts both literally and figuratively having a much greater punch to them, to even the designs of the mansions themselves being more detailed. Also, fun fact, but did you know that before the concept of Dark Moon even came up, a Luigi's Mansion sequel was proposed to have glasses-free 3D for the GameCube? Yeesh. Good luck with that one, guys. But anyway, and this is a positive throughout the whole series, by the way, but there is so much personality here with the characters. Starting off with Luigi himself, because these games added so much character to what was essentially a fucking reskin of Mario, we now have the fucking dopey twerp we have today, and thankfully, despite the hardware limitations, Dark Moon delivered on the personality the series is known for and then some. And Dark Moon, he's had so many moments both in cutscenes and in moments of gameplay where his timid mannerisms and expressions take center stage, like his nervous facial expressions, his hand gestures where he twiddles his thumbs, and even his over-the-top screams. And I don't know, man, I just find it very charming. It even kept up with the Luigi's Mansion tradition and had Luigi hum the game's theme. And it's not just Luigi, I got enjoyment out of Gadd being the fucking giggly bitch psychopath that he is, and unlike in the first game, the Goon Ghosts actually have distinct personalities. Sure, they can be one note or even a bit annoying, but still, I appreciate the effort to make these ghost traits to make every encounter different through their personalities and how they interact with the environments. But when it comes to the presentation of the game, however, I do have some issues with it. Now, I personally don't mind the cartoony art style for the game. If anything, I really like it. No, my issue with this game's presentation comes to the simple geometry of the exterior of the mansions. Like, if you're gonna have a cartoony haunted house themed video game, why not go over the top with the designs of the mansions and the environments? But because everything has this incredibly simple look to it, it clashes hard with the art style of the game in my opinion. Like, look at this tree, yikes. Thankfully, when it comes to the interior designs of the mansions, however, the more darker lighting hides many of the imperfections and enhances the atmosphere. So this is a very minor complaint, and Dark Moon as a whole is still a very good looking game, especially for the 3DS. Now, when I first started to play Dark Moon, my main concern wasn't with how the game looked, but rather how it would play. See, in the original, the game had to control Luigi with the analog stick and control the camera with the C-stick, but because the 3DS only has one circle pad, I wasn't sure on how this game could pull this kind of control scheme off. And let me just say that the developers sure as hell took advantage of the 3DS's hardware, that's for sure. When you're using the poltergeist, you have two options to control the direction it's facing. You could either use the X or Y button to control whether the poltergeist is facing up or down, since once you use it, you're locked in the direction you're standing in, or you could use the console's gyro sensor. This is resourceful, but isn't really comfortable. Both of these control schemes have their own problems. Starting off with the gyro controls, I feel like while it gives you better scenic control of the camera per se, it is downright cumbersome to use. Because the gyro sensor requires me to move the entire system, I would often have to reposition my fucking head in order to get a proper view of the game, which isn't exactly a comfortable experience. And while on the topic of gyro controls, there are parts of the game where you have to tightrope your way through certain areas, and you have to keep Luigi balanced by using gyro controls. These segments are not very good. Having to move the 3DS to keep Luigi balanced is a cool idea and concept, as it raises attention for the player because they literally have to keep him balanced, but in execution, it's fucking horrible, because once again, having to move the whole system for something that could have very easily been controlled with a circle pad is not fun. And the button controls have the opposite problem. Rather than having the complete control of the camera that the gyro controls give you, controlling the direction of the poltergeist with the X and Y buttons only allows you to point the poltergeist in either the upper or downer direction, which can be helpful when it comes to certain puzzles, but not exactly when you're sucking up ghosts, especially that when you use a strobe bulb, you have to hold down the A button. So when I resort to this control scheme, my fingers are really close to each other, that makes capturing ghosts annoying. I would have to have my thumb on the A button, my index finger on the X button, and my middle finger on the R button to be ready to suck up ghosts. So as you can imagine, this isn't really the optional way to hold the 3DS. I just wish that the 3DS was built with a second circle pad, because if I could have gotten an actual fucking analog stick to control the camera, I would have no issues with this game gameplay wise, because the camera is arguably my biggest problem with the game, as it can make playing it really uncomfortable at times, or at least for me. Maybe I'm just a fucking bitch, I don't know. But with that out of the way, it's time for me to talk about how Dark Moon actually evolved the gameplay of the original. The strobe bulb and dark light device are fantastic repertoires to Luigi's moveset that feel incredibly natural. The original game had some shenanigans with some fire and water bullshit that helped you solve really complicated puzzles, I assure you. But here, something like the dark light device is a way better alternative in both gameplay and a world building sense. The fact that this game gave Booze the ability to leave shit droplets that'll turn objects invisible is such a goddamn creative idea that I adore so much. It gets a little monotonous when I'm too stupid to remember that the map and shadows on the wall show when objects and doors are missing, but that's more so on me and not on poor game design, because the dark light device was integrated in such a genius way that makes puzzles way more interesting than in the first game. The strobe bulb isn't as in depth as the dark light device, but it still adds an extra layer of depth to sucking up ghosts. In the original, you just kinda shined your flashlight in front of the ghosts to have their hearts show up, and then you start sucking them up. But in Dark Moon, holding down on the strobe bulb and then stunning the ghosts by flashing them makes capturing ghosts way more satisfying and engaging in my opinion. And what adds to this is the upgrade system, which actually gives me an incentive to collect money. In the original, you just get a different ending screen if you collect a certain amount of money. Fucking fantastic. But here, the game gives you an incentive to collect money by upgrading features to your poltergust, whether it be the dark matter device, making it last longer without overheating, or the amount of damage the poltergust does when you're sucking on ghosts. This, in my opinion, added a great amount of modern touches to the Luigi's Mansion formula, while not feeling intrusive. Now, with this game being on a handheld, it handles its mission and plot structure differently than the first game. While in the original, you have the entire mansion to explore, this game has multiple mansions with different objectives to do in them. Now, while on paper, this seems like a good way to make the game more suitable for handheld play, right? Just have the game be structured like a regular Mario game, with different levels to clear and have the player play whichever missions they wanted to at a certain time. Like, for example, each mission could require the player to clear one floor of the mansion at a time. Sure, it would be repetitive, but who really cares since the gameplay is fun, right? But this is where the idea starts to fall apart, is that unlike in a regular Mario platformer, Luigi's Mansion is a very story-driven game. So if you do want to end up going back to a level, not only will you be regressing in the story progression, but you'll also have to do a lot of backtracking through sections of the mansion you already cleared, which can be incredibly tedious. Whereas in Mario games, where each level serves as a fun platforming challenge, missions in Dark Moon vary from very fun to downright puzzling. What I mean by this is that sometimes some fucking dickhead ghost would appear out of nowhere, typically in the beginning or at the end of the mission, to undo the progress you made, which grinds the pacing of the story to a fucking screeching halt. In addition to this, I feel like 6 missions, including the boss, seems a bit much. I feel like after fucking 4 missions, I've seen everything that a Pacific Mansion had to offer, and that I'm ready to move on to the next one. If the filler missions were cut, I feel like Dark Moon would have the best pacing out of any Luigi's Mansion game, because the original felt a bit too short and 3 felt too fucking long. But because the missions in Dark Moon vary from legitimately fun with you exploring the mansions by solving clever puzzles, or really tedious with you having to backtrack through a lot of the mansion to undo some shit some faggot ghost just undid for you, I can't definitively say that it does have better overall pacing compared to the original, or maybe even 3. In fact, I'll give you a perfect example of this game's poor pacing. In the first mission of Old Clockworks, Gadd tells you to search for some big ass clock, which will take you about 5 to 10 minutes to find. Then you find out that the ghost for some reason took the hand off the clock, so now you gotta find the compass to find the ghost that took the hand instead of just looking for the ghosts themselves to begin with. That itself is already pointless filler, but there's more. A few minutes of exploration and puzzle solving pass, and you're in this room where you gotta blow on the ceiling fan to get this wall to open. Sounds simple, right? Well, it would, but then these dickhead ghosts stop you from progressing in your objective, so now you have another few minutes of filler to deal with. And when you get rid of those assholes is when you finally get the fucking compass, and when you do, the mission just abruptly ends. What the shit? Actually, thinking about it now, Old Clockworks in general has the worst pacing out of all the mansions. It takes 4 out of the 6 missions to get this stupid ass clock door working, when it could have been 2 at the fucking most. Like, I know it probably sounds I hate to play a game I spent money on, but don't get the wrong idea. This is a great game, but it's really baffling why they felt the need to add pointless filler to missions that don't need it at all, when all I want to do is progress through the story, because all this does is interrupt interrupt the flow of the game and makes playing through some of the missions all the more tedious because it didn't have to be this way. There are some other gripes I have here and there, but the last major piece of criticism I have with Dark Moon involves its story. Now, like I said before, prior to this, I have only played Luigi's Mansion 1 and 3, but what I didn't mention was how derivative 3's story was to the original, which I thought was incredibly fucking lame. Oh no, Mario and friends got stuck in paintings. Where have I seen that before? Like, the concept of the series revolves around Luigi sucking up fucking ghosts. Surely they could have come up with a different story than fat Italian man and painting bad. Well, Dark Moon actually starts off pretty interestingly, with the ghosts being pretty helpful to Gadd's experiments until King Boo fucks it all up by destroying the Dark Moon, which is a MacGuffin that makes ghosts act friendly. Stupid the plot may be, but it sounds like a lot of fun can be had here while establishing world building for what the original Luigi's Mansion set up. And there's a fucking Toad in a painting. God damn it, Toad, you really have to ruin everything, don't you? Look, I know I probably sound like a fucking pretentious bitch right now, but was this subplot really necessary? King Boo turning friendly's hostile really wasn't enough of a motivation for Luigi and the player? Did we really need a rehashing of the original story with another one coming 6 years later? I really hope that in Luigi's Mansion 4, instead of a painting, you gotta save Mario from a fucking placenta. That would really make it better. Remember earlier in the video when I said that a gripe I had with the third game was how quickly the hotel theme was dropped in favor of multiple themed floors? But in Dark Moon, they were able to have each mansion have a certain theme, which makes each mansion be distinct and memorable from each other without having to go over the top with it. Like, I can see these places as actual locations in the Mario universe. Like, for example, Gloomy Manor is just your standard everyday haunted mansion, which is a great introductory mansion for both veterans and newcomers. And then later on in the game, you go to Secret Mine, but despite how bad that name is, you explore an abandoned mine with the creativity and the obstacles and puzzles going through the fucking roof. Each and every mansion has unique and clever obstacles and puzzles that play into that theme of the mansion. Like in Secret Mine, you gotta uncover this puck from the snow and shoot it into the goal in order to get these gold ghosts to come out so you can get money out of them. That's such a simple yet clever puzzle that plays into the theme of the mansion in a really cool way in my opinion. And the same thing applies to the bosses. They all tie into the theme of the mansions in really cool and creative ways. Like the old Clockworks boss, you're on a big ass clock and are given a new challenge every time the minute hand is on a new number. Sure, it's just a glorified gauntlet and not challenging in the slightest, but I appreciate the creativity. Actually, that's the thing with Dark Moon. I wish people appreciated Dark Moon for what it is rather than not like it for what it isn't. I remember when Super Mario Odyssey came out and everyone was saying how underwhelming the previous title, 3D World, was in comparison to it and all the 3D Mario games that came before it. But when 3D World plus Bowser's Fury came out last year was when everyone started to appreciate 3D World for what it is rather than be underwhelmed for what it isn't. Sure, you can say Dark Moon is an objectively bad sequel for how sharply it changes its tone and general art style than that of the original, but I don't think that at all. I think Dark Moon is not perfect by any means, but it's still an incredible game that deserves to be talked about in the same way as the first and third installments. Not because it's different from the original, but because of the overall quality of the game itself. I think Dark Moon evolved the gameplay and world building of the original alone for it to be considered a good sequel. But even if you think Dark Moon is a bad sequel, hopefully this video can at least let us agree that Dark Moon at the end of the day is a good video game. And that's all I have to say. Thank you all so much for watching and I'll see you all next time.